Why do people who were once close to God walk away? This is a very interesting question. On the one hand, this question is a question that says, can people lose their salvation? If someone has been saved, can they lose their salvation? On the other hand, this is a question about just the individual personal thing of why can a person who seems to have everything together then leave it? And it's a very complicated issue, but there's some passages that would inform us, especially in the book of 1 John. We won't have time to look up all the individual passages, but I just want to, if you're keeping notes on some of these questions and answers, look up 1 John. One of the things John says in there is that we know we're in Him if we're obeying His Word. We know we're connected to God if we're obeying His Word. So then, and another place he says that those people who have left us were never part of us because they were never really with us. So on one side, on this personal, individual side, I would say if there's a person who looks to be religious, looks to be faithful, looks to be obedient to God, and then they walk away, it's evidence that it was never real for them in the first place. What they were doing is they were playing a religious game. It wasn't that God had actually entered their heart. It wasn't that God had actually changed them. In Hebrews 10, it says that we need to be wary that those people who have actually tasted the gift of God and then left it, there's really no chance for them to come back. They never really swallowed, so to speak. They just tasted it a little bit. They got a little sense of what Christianity was all about. They played with it. They tried Jesus, and it didn't work for them. And so they walked away. And that's not the way God works. God doesn't play voodoo. He's not a game player. He says, I want to be in your life or not. I want to have your life or not. It's also a fundamental misunderstanding about why we need to be in a relationship with God anyway. There's an understanding we have in our world that says basically, I need to make sure I please God with my life and the works and things that I do. And that's not the case at all. Granted, I want to please God with my life. But the ultimate reality is I don't need to please God as much as I need God's forgiveness and grace. So if I'm a person who says, God has forgiven me, I am hopeless without Him, I'm not walking away. Right? If I've gotten to that place of saying, I'm hopeless without Him, I'm not going to walk away. The second issue of can a person walk away from the faith, can they walk away from their salvation, can they lose their salvation, is a very complicated issue, and it involves a big range of biblical texts. But the simplest answer comes from Jesus Himself. He says about Himself, He says, I have not lost any that the Father has brought to me. And then He says, my Father in heaven is greater than I, and no one can snatch anyone away from His hand. And then in Romans 8 it says that nothing in all creation can separate us from God's love. And so even if a person on the surface looks like they may have wandered from the path, if they have actually got God in their heart, God will bring them back. It's a promise He has given to us. He will bring them back. And so it's a very complicated sort of scenarios, but it all boils down to this. If anyone asks me that question face to face, I return it with a question where I say, why are you asking? Is it because there's a loved one you're worried about, or is it because of you? If it's a loved one you're worried about, we can't ever answer it because we don't know the state of their heart. If it's because of you, then I need to give you some reassurance that even though God has claimed you for all eternity, you cannot walk away. Because if you do, that's evidence that He never truly had your heart. Does that make sense?